Heather, welcome to the Creating Meaningful Work podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was so excited when I found out that you live not too far from me in Redlands.
I know we are just like a hop, skip, and a jump away.
Yeah, because we moved here during the pandemic and, moved away from LA. And I was so sad because
Mhm.
everyone I know is in LA. And so I think I saw you on an Instagram live and you were like, oh, if anyone's in Redlands, I was like, wait, is she in Redlands? And, for those of you listening, it's about 20 minutes away from me. So finding
Yeah,
cool people out here is very exciting to me. So, how are you feeling? You just had a very big book launch.
I did.
Um, yeah, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Oh gosh, that's a it seems like a surface question. I'm like, how deep do you want to get here, my friend? I am feeling okay. It's like depends on which way I'm looking at things and what's happening. I don't know. I think for any like for people listening, if you and people who start things, right? Like you have an idea and then you put the work into it. And then in an artistic space, especially, it's like your heart in the world. And that's how I felt with each book. This is my fourth book I've written and published. And so each time it is like this is really important to me, and the reality is, it's just not that important to a lot of other people. That sounds really harsh. It's just
Mm,
the reality, like
mm,
that's just nothing. I think is maybe I'm wrong in this, or I have a lot of learning and growth to do in this. I just think as artists, especially, or entrepreneurs, like creating a new thing, I don't know that it's ever as important to anybody else as it is to us, right? Like
mhm,
no one loves our kids like we love our own kids, for those of us who are parents. So
mhm,
it also feels like that anytime I produce something and put it into the world. So I've tried really hard to disconnect myself from some of that when I've launched a book, like the actual launch of a book. Um, like I told you, sorry, it's a loaded question, but my first two books that came out, like my first one, I've never launched a book before. This is so fun, amazing. And on the actual launch, I was in a bad headspace, and I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know what was going on. And I kind of like sat back after all that and realized that it was so much missed expectations that I didn't even know I had.
mm,
Um, and then the next time I launched a book, I like went in the opposite direction in terms of um putting my heart into the launch of it, like the actual event of the launch. And that wasn't good either. And then my third book, which was my first children's book, I got a therapist. I started going to
Oh,
therapy, like, okay, I think there's something here I need to figure out. So that was really good. Got some good tools. So then launching this book, had these great tools to work with, but also just the reality for me when I launch a book is a lot of missed expectation that I can just linger in that disappointment.
mm,
And I think as humans, we're kind of, I don't know if it's our humanity that's prone to lean towards just to the like negative, like the idea that, have you heard of that like Teflon versus Velcro idea? And that like our brains, negative things come at us and stick like Velcro, positive things
mhm,
stick like Teflon,
mhm.
that
Yes.
idea.
Yeah,
So that's how it
yeah.
feels launching a book. It's like yes, there's a lot of positive things, and the amount of people who have shown up and bought the book and reached out. I mean, it's humbling to my core, and I can real easily look at all the people who didn't. And
Yeah.
so I find myself every time I've launched a book, it's a very up and down kind of like it's a space of conflict for me. Does that
Mm,
make sense?
it makes
Yeah.
total sense. Yeah, I think we have this as artists and as creators, there's like this side that just wants to create and does create from this heart space, and then there's this other side of it all, like the numbers and the metrics and the
Yes. Yes.
sales and the marketing and like trying to get people to buy it, which feels so opposite of where it like actually came from. And I find
Yes.
that a lot of times I myself struggle with this, and in a lot of conversations I have with other creators, we struggle with that a lot. And you can kind of get into, even in the art space, when you're in that creative space, it's easy to kind of move into that marketing and sales and metrics headspace, which doesn't help the work, right?
Yep.
But like,
Yep.
you're also like, well, what do people need to hear or want to hear? What's a message that's going to resonate? And it it can be a real head trip. So,
Yeah. And it's something I'm not good at. I'm not good at the releasing the how society deems it to be successful, right? Like air quotes around what makes it successful, which is everything you just mentioned, like the numbers and all that stuff. I'm not great at releasing that. So that's where it's like a real intention for me. Um, so then I just feel a little bit exhausted.
mhm,
And I think too in the last 10 years with social media, it's just we've been trained that way, even more so.
mhm,
Every single thing you do, whether it's a picture of your dog that you just took that morning because you were on a walk, or a sunset, or this beautiful piece of art that you created that is your living. This is how you get paid, everything in between. It is likes and comments and analytics and numbers and reach and engagement and it
mhm,
sucks your soul dry. But it is what it is. Like that, this is what we're doing. Like, I don't know how else to sell a book,
mhm,
than to be wrapped up in all of that. So I think it is just a tender space of trying for me to find out where do I go to find my true value and worth, and
mhm,
it can't be in the sale of a book or even anything I've created in that regard.
mhm,
I don't think.
mhm.
Um, but then as an artist, it's like, but this is my heart, right? Like, but love me, please love me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, your
Yeah.
message is so important too. I'm sure there's that part of it too, where you want other people to, be on board with your important message.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, for those who are not familiar with you and your work, can you talk a little bit about who you are and what you do, what you talk about?
Yeah, thanks for letting me go real deep and vulnerable there at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Here for it.
Um, yeah, so am currently I run a business called The Lucky Few. And it was birthed from my oldest child, who her name is Mason, and she has Down syndrome. So I can go back a little bit for some background. So my husband and I met when we were really young, got married really young. I was 20 when we got married, and we knew we wanted to have kids. And so early on in our marriage, started to tried to start a family. Weren't able to. Went through years of like figuring out why and landing on just my own personal infertility, which is just there's not like a specific reason. It's pretty mysterious. But that led us towards the path of adoption, and we started an adoption plan and ended up adopting a little girl who has Down syndrome, and she had a lot of other health issues as well. Um, it was never our intention or our goal to have a child with a disability, but it was the path that we found ourselves on. It's a very, very, very long story. But that we bring this little girl home, Macy. We named her Mason, Macyn. We call her Macy. And she just started to really put into question for me this narrative around what it means to be human, what gives us value and worth. Before she came home, the hesitation in adopting her and the reason we never pursued a child with Down syndrome was this narrative around Down syndrome that is like very negative. It's scary, it's a burden, it's going to ruin your life. Um, and it's just how hard it is and how bad it is. And then we bring home this baby and we're like, that's not the reality we're living. And then we get into the community, the Down syndrome community, the larger community. And we're like, no one really in this community feels this way. Like some people do, but very, very few people are like, man, I sure wish I didn't have this kid after they have this kid. And even there's been studies done by people with Down syndrome that when they're asked if they're content and happy, it's something astronomical. Like how many people with Down syndrome would say that they are happy with who they are versus people without Down syndrome. It's
Wow.
the percentage, it is just almost twice as many people with Down syndrome would say, I'm content and happy with who I am
Wow.
versus people without. So there's this disconnect, right? Like, what is that about? And I just felt so early on as Mason's mom, I felt so lucky to have her. Like, it was so obvious the space that we'd walk into when she was even just a baby, that she was the only person with Down syndrome there. And I would be like at playgroups with moms, or I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years. And I'd be like at playgroups with moms and other things that we would go to. And it's like, wow, I'm so lucky. Like I get to be her mom. She's the only one here like this, and I
Mhm,
get to be her mom. And I
mhm.
felt so lucky in that. So I started blogging. She came home in 2008. And that's when everyone started blogging. I think everyone with a computer.
That was peak blog years.
Peak
Those were
blog
good
years.
times. I love
Yes,
those years.
it was the best. and I had gone from being a full-time educator, I was a teacher, to home full-time. So I just raising a child is a lot, but I also had, and I'm an artist in terms of like a creative. I just needed an outlet. So I started writing this blog, and then Instagram came along. I started sharing about our family, and it just, um, it was a story that people wanted to hear, whether they could resonate with it or it was interesting to them because they couldn't and they wanted to understand more. And so it just grew into what it is. I got a book deal, and my first book is called The Lucky Few. It came out in 2017. Our Instagram grew to where we can be social media influencers, and um, that, yeah, it just, we started this business, The Lucky Few, in hopes of shifting the Down syndrome narrative and creating a more inclusive world. So
Mhm.
that's a little bit of the backstory. We have two other kids. I have an 11-year-old Truly and a 8-year-old August. Also came to me through adoption, and my 8-year-old also has Down syndrome. So it's just been the journey that we've got to go on, and
Mhm.
getting to share it with the world, which is like literally share it with the world, which is kind of wild if you stop to think about it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's cool. I didn't know that you started out as a blog. It makes total sense though. Um, yeah, I personally I don't remember where I first stumbled upon your work and your storytelling about you and your family, but I mean, I think a combination of just like sharing who your kids are with your words and your advocacy for them is just so special. Even hearing you talk about it, it's just really there's something very special about what you are doing and what you are sharing. Can you talk a little bit about, your most recent book that just came out is called Everyone Belongs. By the way, we have your first children's book. Uh, I'm forgetting the name.
Different,
It's
a
good to
great
be
thing to
different.
be.
It's different, a great thing to be.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have that one, and then we now have Everyone Belongs. And when we went to your book signing in Redlands, Shepherd saw Macy and he was like, "Is that Macy?"
Oh my
He
god.
like knew her from the book. It was so sweet. And I was like, "Yeah, do you want to say hi?" And he was like being shy. But then he continued to talk about Macy afterwards. He was like, "Yeah, we got to see Macy." He
Oh
was
my
like telling my
gosh.
mom, he's like, "Yeah, we got to see Macy from the book." And it was just so sweet. And so yeah, can you talk a little bit about Everyone Belongs,
Mhm.
and what that even just that title, what that means and kind of what you're working to create, with this work that you're doing?
Yes, for sure. When Macy and August, I was this, and my middle daughter, for the listeners who aren't familiar, she's African American and Guatemalan, and my husband and I are Caucasian, the rest of us are. So she's also a different race than we are and finds herself in minority groups. And all three of my kids as adoptees are, they're all in just like lots of different fringe groups, minority groups. And when they leave our front door, they're stepping into a world where their worth and value is in question just because of who they are. And so we have found it very difficult to find spaces where we have belonging as a whole family. Mostly for my kids with Down syndrome, there has been this, like, culturally and systemically, people with disabilities are put in separate spaces. Most schools still, people with intellectual disabilities are going to be in a separate special education classroom. And so they are they are siphoned off in their communities. There's the special church program, there's the special dance class, there's the all these different things. That the expectation is, well, this is where they go, and then they're separated from their peers and from their community, and then they can't be known. And if you can't be known, you can't experience belonging. And in fighting these systems and or challenging them and saying, no, this isn't how it's going to be, it's not for the sake of like, let's challenge a thing. It's because my kids can sense it and they want to be a part of the world like anybody else. And so as I'm navigating that with them and realizing, like, and I could give story after story, like as early as first grade for Macy being in a separate classroom, and her showing in her own ways like that she didn't have a sense of belonging, so why would she want to be in a space, you know?
Mhm.
I find for them as I've raised them and for myself that we as humans, that's what we're after, really, in our deepest heart of hearts, like in the core of who we are. We want to know that we belong somewhere. We want community, we want belonging. We want to walk in a space and not have who we are questioned, the worth of who we are questioned.
Mhm.
And if that's what we all are looking for, then why aren't we working harder to do that for everybody? Because I
Mhm.
don't think belonging can happen unless it's happening for everybody. It doesn't really exist. Um, so I love working with kids because I think, and I switched from adult literature to children because kids are just like, this is the cliche, but they are the hope for the future. They just
Mhm.
truly are.
Mhm.
Um, and how do we give parents tools to help kids be their best selves? How do we give kids tools to help be their best selves? So this idea of everyone belongs, let's start telling our kids that, and telling them that the quote, like the normal thing to do is have places and systems built for everybody, not
Mhm.
just excluding certain people groups. Um, and let's tell that story.
Mhm.
So this idea of everyone belongs is just at the foundation of our family. It's foundational to the work at the Lucky Few. And then the book is a book about sisters who just want to go put on a show and be themselves, who are as different as can be, but they know that that's what makes them unique and wonderful. And they go to put on a show, and different characters approach them wondering if they can be a part of the show. And they have different disabilities that would maybe make it hard for them to join in a show. And the sisters tell them exactly who you are is exactly who we pick. And then they have to adjust and create a show where everyone can truly belong. So yeah, I think that kids can hear that message more easily than adults. And I think about my daughter Macy, who's now in 8th grade. And when Macy interacted with kids her age, when she was a toddler, or even like kindergarten, I don't know where the break it was, like at what age, it was easier for her to be embraced and find belonging versus someone in 5th grade who's never interacted with someone with Down syndrome. I mean, it feels almost impossible for her to
Mhm.
find belonging initially with that
Mhm.
person. But if she meets someone that when they were in kindergarten knew a person with a disability, or knew someone like Macy and then later met Macy, she's known, right? Like she
Yeah.
belongs where they are because they knew her when they were younger, or someone like her.
Mhm.
Um, so that's a little bit about where the book came from.
Yeah. I've I think it's so important, and it's something that, yeah, I want to be more aware of with our kids as they're in this young stage, because um yeah, like you said, that familiarity, when they're young, is so important. You said something, and I heard you say this at an event before, and it just like gave me goosebumps, where you said something to the effect of, none of us belong until we all are belonging. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about more about why that is? Because I think this is so important. I think it relates to so many different things. It relates to, um social justice, racial
Mhm.
justice, where it's
Mhm.
like none of us are actually free till we all are
Yeah.
actually free. And yeah, I just love, can you talk a little bit about why that is?
Yeah, for sure. I just think that we can't be I think that there's a collective humanity. I think that we have to have an awareness about those who are around us because we are connected to them. Because what I do matters to you, and what I don't do matters to you and everybody around us. Like there's this, I just believe that. I believe that we're all connected to one another in some regard, and that at our deepest core is this intrinsic value and worth because we are alive. That's it. Like you are alive and breathing, therefore you have deep worth because you are a human being alive and breathing. And so I think if I can't see that in other people, um, if I can't see that in every person, then I would question whether I can see it in anybody. And I for sure can't see it in me. And that took some undoing for me, which my kids were the invitation to that undoing of this idea that there is a hierarchy of human. I just
Mhm.
don't believe that. And I don't believe that because it doesn't I'm not like a researcher, so I don't have a lot of good like data for this. I can just look at the people I know well, the people sharing on social media, the way that our society leans, and when we create these systems of hierarchy in humans and we say you are better because A, B, C, and D, or you are worse because A, B, C, and D, um, we're doing that and everyone's pretty miserable and everyone feels pretty terrible about who they are
Mhm.
because they're never going to measure up to this other person on their right and their left, right? Like we have created a society in which the normal thing to do is question your own value and worth and then do something to be better. Be
Mhm.
better, do more. You're made for more, do more, right? Like, and I get that there's a place for all that language and those ideas, but at the core of who we are as human beings, and as the kids that I raise, where does your value and worth lie? And again, if I can't see it in other people, then I'm not going to be able to see it in me. And so I think that in that idea of like belonging, it kind of goes along with that idea. Like if I'm going to like take a classroom, for example, if we're going to be in a space like a classroom and there's certain kids that aren't invited into that space because of who they are as a human being, then I would say if my kid doesn't belong there, then none of the kids can truly belong there because
Mhm.
someone who is a part of like our collective humanity is missing. Their value and worth is put into question. Therefore, yours is too, right?
Mhm.
Like you, dear kid here who doesn't have a disability, if my kid's value and worth is questioned, whether or not they belong in a space or not, yours is in question too. It's just really fragile, whether you are what you are worth or not.
Mhm.
So I think that when I say that, when I said that, and I was referring to my son in his second grade classroom, yeah, if people walk into a space or a system is built that's exclusive, then chances are everybody in that place questions whether they belong there or not.
Mhm. And isn't that
And
so true?
yeah.
We all do, and those kids do. I'm, like, nodding. I feel like my head's gonna fall off because 'cause I'm like, "Yes, yes, yes." I hate this hierarchy of people that we have in our
So,
society. It really, really bothers me. I think it's so toxic.
mhm,
We've so much our addiction to power and wealth and greed and, like, money and all these things, like, we're seeing them, I think, on a new level right now in our culture and, like,
yeah.
politically, and it's just, like, this search. I feel like it's this deep down, everyone's just, like, trying to prove themselves, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Trying to prove
Yeah.
that worth.
And social media has just been like gasoline on a fire for that, and not a good way. Like, I think, yeah, I know for us as a family, because it's not like we're gonna, sorry, I'm going all over the place here. It's not like we're gonna just avoid it all. And people can. And I applaud that. Like, get off the grid, go find a place, a community, and get off social media. That's great. It's 2022. Like this is what we have. It's what we use for our work. I mean, this is like, how do you pay your bills? Oh, because social media exists, right? So it
Mhm,
can't be only the enemy. And I know for me, and even in sharing at the very beginning of our conversation, how conflicted I am with launching books, with my book launches. I know for me that there has to I've had to develop and learn to find what it is that like tethers me when I feel like I'm flailing out of control, or when those outside voices come in and try to like pull me apart. What can I go back to? And it has been an undoing in myself. And again, I don't know that if I wasn't Macy's mom that I would know to do this. Like I would know to question certain things in my life and then create a new foundation to grow from. She was my invitation into that. But it does go back to I've had to, because of who my kids are, ask the question, what does give a human being value and worth? And I had to answer it. And so I have an answer that I believe in my deepest heart of hearts to be true. And that is the foundation in which everything else is built on. So at the end of the day, even with like, your kid, if you have a kid in school and they're coming home and they're not doing a certain thing, or they failed at this test, or shoot, now we need a tutor, now we need this, and then you can just like spiral down, like if only, if only, if only. Wait a second, all that there might be a place for all of that. It's not all bad, but what's our foundation here? Oh, you failed your math test. Who you are in your core is good and enough. You don't have to pass a math test. That's not what makes you you, right? Like that's not what gives you worth. You didn't make the volleyball team. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's so hard. We can practice and get a coach, whatever. But you know what? If you never make a volleyball team, that's not what gives you value and worth, right? Like you launch a book and you didn't sell this many copies. That's disappointing. But what do you come back to? So
Mm.
that really for me is the thing that helps me just keep doing any of the work that we're doing, and then also raise my kids in a way that hopefully they don't get too um like sucked into that void of you're never going to be good enough because you're never going to get it all done,
Mm.
right? Like because we're never going to get it all done. It's a trick list. Like it will never get done. There will always be someone better at us than the thing that we do well. Always. And so do we just hustle to be better than them? No, because then we're questioning them, like, right? Like then it's just this issue of, well, what is it that gives you worth and value? I think
Mhm.
people have to ask that. They have
Yeah.
to take that journey.
Yeah, 100%. I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday where she was just like, I'm tired of ending every day not feeling enough, like
Ugh.
every single
Ugh.
day.
Yes.
And we were just kind of talking about this idea and, what is enough? Like, what does enough mean? And I was asking her, like, well, what is enough to you? Like, what does that mean to you? And, yeah, like, when you went down that path of asking that question, what was your answer? Like why we have this innate worth as humans?
I mean, it really came down to like, what are their criterias for a human being having value and worth? And do they have a heart beating in their chest and breath in their lungs? I mean, I can't, that's where it is for us. That's where it
Mhm.
is. And that's challenging too. And like, there's people that I don't like that much, right? Like that I wish would stop talking. And again, we can go like way out in the fringes, and it's important to establish these things. Like I'm not inviting harmful people into a space. Like when I say everyone belongs, I think people can get real nitpicky. It's like, that's not what I mean here. Like this
Right.
toxic person who is going to hurt me. No, they're not going to be here, but it's a different category, right?
Yeah, it's like
Um,
they have worth as a human being, but also
yes,
I have boundaries and
yes,
they are outside of these boundaries because
right,
I need to stand up for my worth as a human being. But it doesn't mean that they don't have that worth, but they just aren't in your
right.
space. You have your boundaries that you need.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's more like then I can step back and see a person and think like, okay, if this is my litmus test, they have breath in their lungs, heart beating their chest, they are they have intrinsic value and worth as a human. I can say that about that person, instead of only like and say there's that boundary, and you will not be a part of my day-to-day life. Um, and that's the foundation. Or it can be like there's just bitterness and resentment and hatred, right? Like
Mm.
I think that you can look at people and say, and instead it's like compassion. Like I feel compassion for where you're at, and I hope that you change and do and get better or healthier, whatever it is, instead of like resentment and bitterness, and I hope you burn and die.
Mhm.
um I think that's the difference for me when I'm saying like how you see all people.
Mhm.
I think because my kids with Down syndrome, and even my daughter Truly, who's Black, and especially so much being unearthed in the last few years, um, it is it is blatant that their value and worth is questioned within the systems that me as an able-bodied neurotypical white woman with a college degree, like the systems that I can navigate so well, that say you can be here. It is obvious. It is blatant rejection of my three kids in certain ways.
Mm.
um and so you have kids, like listeners who have kids, it's like, well, wait, that changes everything. So
Mhm.
let's figure that one out here.
Mhm.
It's yeah, I have said this so many times, but it's just that invitation to figuring that out. And it's hard work, um and it's a gift. It's a
Mhm.
gift to have to question things like that, those big
Mhm.
things.
Mhm. What does that look like for you to navigate that with your kids? Like,
Mm,
navigating, you know, helping to create belonging for them, even like
mhm.
in their school system. I'm sure
Yeah.
you deal with like a lot of hard stuff at school, and as a parent standing up for your kids and also standing up for, others with disabilities, and what does that look like for you
Mm.
as your role as you stand up for your kids and also simultaneously are like working to dismantle these oppressive systems?
Yeah, what does that look like? I mean, it is like a case by case thing. My oldest is 14 now, so I have a lot more to learn, but who I was 14 years ago and how I approached advocacy is different now, which I would hope would be for everybody, right? As we learn and grow as lifelong learners. Um, there so again, we start in our home, and I would hope that my kids know who they are. They have that foundation of you are enough, you are good, you are worthy as you are. And when you're in this space, may you only ever feel that. And I think they do. So I know that when I send them out into systems and spaces where they're experiencing rejection, um, that they can come home to a safe place, and that's good for their hearts and souls. But we've shown up just expecting to be there. Sometimes that in and of itself has been like our biggest advocacy work is just the showing up and unapologetically. Like these are my kids and they will be in this dance class. Questions? Like these are my kids and they will be in this classroom. Are you have any questions? Any ways that we can support this? Um, so that's a big piece for us. And it has been having as the mom to like trust your gut, and we've pulled out of things before, like plenty of times and said, we'll show up in a space and it's just not working, and I'll have a conversation and realize like, oh, this happened in a dance class a couple years ago. I had this conversation with the owner of the dance studio, and I was real quick like, "Oh, yeah, we're not coming back here. Like, this is not a conversation that needs to happen." She had an opportunity to have my daughter in her dance studio, and it would have been so good for everybody here, but she's so far from seeing that, and I'm
Mm,
exhausted. We're just gonna go somewhere else. So it's a balance, and then there's other times where it's like, I think that this is worth the second conversation. This is worth the letter. This is worth the energy and the effort for me and for my kids to continue to show up. Um, so like things that are optional, like dance classes, we do a lot of dance. And it's one kind of conversation. It's easy to you can say you're not going here, let's find another dance studio. Things like school, where there's very limited options. It's a lot of a fight. I hate that it's a fight. I'm not a fighter, but that's at the end of the day what it is. And it's knowing my kids' rights. It's knowing what their rights are as humans. It's me taking time to like understand the law then and to show up and say this is their right as a human being, and to start out the conversation with that idea like this is my kid, they have Down syndrome and it's an asset. So we're not going to try to change this about them. We're going to celebrate it in them and support them in the way that they need support. How
mhm,
can we do that? Let's do it
mhm,
together. Like
mhm,
bringing people back to that. Like, do you see my kid here? My
mm,
human being alive child here?
mm,
And do you see that they are good?
mhm.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, and if people don't, it's just case by case and space by space, and it's hard and exhausting work, and sometimes I have to take a break too, and my kids do too, like last year with my daughter Macy, we took her out of the she's been in general ed inclusion her whole education, and we switched her over to like a very excluded living skills class because it was just too much for all of us. Like
Mm,
after going off to school after the pandemic, and it was like, "This is unfair for her, and there's not another place, so let's take a break. Like, let's take a
mm.
breath." And now tomorrow I have a meeting to discuss putting her back into general education classes for her whole day. So, I don't know that that answers your question really at all.
Yeah, it totally does. It totally does. Yeah, and, uh, yeah, I just as you do this for your own kids, you're doing this for so many other kids, whether, you see that immediate impact or not, even just, the storytelling that you're doing through your books, through this conversation. And I know for me, you posted recently, a video which was like, oh, so heartbreaking, of Macy on her first day sitting at
Mm,
school, and she was sitting on the ground and she was sitting by herself. And I mean, I just like, as a mom, my kids aren't in school yet, but I just
mhm.
like, I think moms, any mom who watched that video, like our hearts were like,
Yeah,
oh, like breaking. And it was like such a, and I think you said this as you talked, narrated through it, or after maybe, but it was such like a reminder of like, okay, this is so important to teach our kids to, when you see the kid by themselves, when you see someone struggling, or you see someone alone, see someone who, isn't sitting with friends, to go and talk to that person, to be the
yeah,
one who is, inviting them in. Um and even just that, and sharing that experience, I have had conversations with my son. I mean, he's 3, he's not, we're starting him in preschool in, the beginning of the year, but it's just so important to have these conversations, and I can imagine that it is really exhausting. Like, that sounds exhausting, that
yeah.
just to have to be in that fight all the time.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, makes sense that you would take that break, and now you're revisiting it, and what's you know what's the next thing, what's that next step look like? But yeah, I think that break is so important. Did Macy feel does Macy feel like that was a healthy break for her, like that she too is involved in kind of this fight, or do you feel like it's, you're the one kind of doing it and she's shielded from it, or what is that dynamic like for her?
Yeah, it's interesting with her, and then with my son August, they're just so different. Macy is limited in her verbal language, and so a lot of her communication is through her behavior and her energy and things like that. So some of it is a guessing game. Like the reality is I could be getting it wrong a lot of the time. I think as her mom, I need to as long as I'm open to being wrong and being okay with being wrong and being corrected, then we're okay because we can keep making progress. Um, and it looked like for her refusing when we got to the point where I was like, "She needs this isn't working anymore." She had a lot of support in place at school, but even with that support, going from class to class, the transition was like specifically for this, she never finished 5th grade because the pandemic hit. And so she went from elementary school, from never getting to finish elementary school to 7th grade. And so 6 periods a day, new campus, 1,500 kids versus 500 kids. Um, and and we're all in masks, and everyone feels that post-pandemic stress going back into school for that last year. So it was
Yeah.
all those layers, and she was just refusing to go from class to class, um, and spending a lot of her day like in the hall and shut down, and like a lot of high emotions for things that wouldn't normally be that way. So she
Mhm.
wasn't saying to me, well, she was saying, I don't like school. She would say that. And I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. Which she's also a teenager, like an adolescent, so it's hard to know what's what. But
Mhm.
it, but I could just tell that she was stressed. And even like looking all the way back in 1st grade, she was in a separate special education program, and she was having all these behaviors that was like, this is out of character for her. What's going on here? And as we asked the questions, even though she wasn't saying the words, I don't feel like I belong in this community. It was like, I think that she feels like an outsider in her school because she's segregated over here. She gets to visit the 1st graders as like the visitor from the special class, but she's not their peer. She's not a
Mhm.
member of this school. And once like that was kind of the I think that's why she's acting this way,
Mm.
because that's why I would feel that way,
Mhm.
and then taking steps and then realizing, "Oh, look how much better she's doing."
Mm.
Now that she is a part of her community, I think that's what she wants in the end. So some of it for me is like, okay, she's a human. What do humans need and want? And and then her behavior will help. And um this as much as she can have like autonomy over herself and her life, she should. I want that for her. Like she is her own human that gets to say how her life goes. And as she's gotten older, especially so. So for this transitioning out of this living skills class into the back to general education, she said at the end of the school year, "Mom, I want class to class to class to class, like English and math and science." So she said she wants to go to every period and be a part of the school like all of her other peers. And so that's what I told everybody, like, this is what she wants. And so we're trying to
Mhm.
make that happen for her because she said she wants it.
Mhm.
And she feels happier and more content with
Mhm.
herself when she is looked at like a human
Mhm.
and treated
Mhm.
as such. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Um, as we have just a few minutes left here, I'd love to hear from you how we, as mothers, as people creating meaningful work, as humans existing, how can we help to create spaces where everyone belongs?
Yeah. It's a really big, good, big question. I think just asking that, right? Like that awareness is a great starting point. That you even know to ask that question. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to go, there's 3 different lines in my book that I think can help explain in my new children's book, Everyone Belongs. So the I explained that the sisters do this show and people walk up and they say, can I be a part of it? And the sisters say to them, exactly who you are is exactly who we pick. So being the kind of people that either step into relationship with somebody else, or if we are leaders, or if we own businesses, or if we're throwing a party, or if we're a teacher or whatever it is for our kids, looking at people and saying exactly who you are is exactly who I pick. You can be here just as you are. Um, and that doesn't mean that there's not going to be opportunity for learning and growth and change, but let's start there. I see you, and who you are is who I pick. And then later on, more kids gather around and they're watching, and it says they're wondering if they can be a part of this show. And the character truly looks at everybody and she says, "I'm so happy you're here. You're in the right place." So it's in that same vein, right? Like teaching our kids that when someone walks up at the playground who's different and wants to play a game, or when we're at, I don't know, wherever we're at a park and someone walks up, or we're at a restaurant and someone walks by who's different and maybe starts to talk to us, or we're a teacher and a student walks in our classroom, or we're a boss and a new employee comes, like looking at them and the first thing we're saying is, "I'm so happy you're here. You're in the right place."
Mhm.
And I even think of it like with Macy, my daughter, like if she were to walk into an honors English class as a 14-year-old who's just reading sight words, and that teacher saying, "I'm so happy you're here. You're in the right place." Not that she stays in honors English, but that you can say, "I'm so happy you're here. You're in the right place because we are here to help you be your best self." And that might mean going to a different spot, a different location, but I'm so happy that I'm the one that gets to help come support you in that.
Mm.
And then at the end of the show, a character named Shep is a wheelchair user and he comes up to the stage and they realize there's no ramp. And so how can Shep be a part of this show if there's no ramp? And he's going to leave. He turns his chair away feeling sad and everyone gets quiet. And then True says, the space is the problem, not how he gets around.
Mhm.
I think a lot of fostering belonging is questioning what it already exists, questioning the systems in place, questioning the spaces, and even saying, okay, so we're going to have 25 people adjust for this one person. Yeah, that's what we're doing, right? Like this is
Mhm.
how what we're going to do. We're going to have the majority shift and bend and flex so that everybody else can be a part of what's happening. And I think if you take those three ideas from 2 little girls in a children's book, um, you're on your way towards creating spaces of belonging.
Mm. Exactly who you are is exactly who we pick. We're happy you're here. You're in the right place. And the space is the problem, not how he gets around. I love that so much. My son's name is Shepherd. So
Mhm.
we love Shep in the book. And I
I
love
love
how he
that.
comes in at the end. And that line has definitely stood out to me. The space is the problem, not how he gets around. um because we've created this world and it's exactly that. It's like deprogramming ourselves from saying this is the right way and this is the wrong way. It's like, no, this is like how this system has just been operating, and it doesn't work for all people. How do we like deprogram our own minds and unlearn so much? There's so much unlearning. So thank you for helping us do that and helping us in that process and just for so beautifully sharing your family with the world. I know that that probably comes with a lot, and I'm sure there's some days where you're like second guessing like how, all these things, and social media is a hard place to be sometimes, but I'm just so grateful for you sharing your family with us, sharing your family with the world because it's such a gift. So thank you so
Oh
much
my
for
gosh.
the work that you're doing. I feel so especially like tender about it because I feel like my kids are involved in this learning, and that's because you've done these children's books and because you're of your kids and who they are. So it feels just extra special to me. So just thank you for being
Yes.
you and just for being such a mama bear for your kids and teaching us how to also be that for others.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. That was very, very kind and generous for you to say all of that. So I appreciate it. I receive it. I'm grateful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Before we end here, where can people find you? How can we support the amazing work that you're doing?
Yes, so on Instagram, you can follow the Lucky Few official. That's where we hang out most of the time on in terms of social media. And then I have a podcast, the Lucky Few podcast. If you are, and it's I have two co-hosts who have kids with Down syndrome. It's a very Down syndrome specific podcast. So if anyone listening is interested in that, and heatheravis.com will link you to all of the things happening in our world.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Heather.
Yes, thank you.